There we are. Tyson Fury reigns supreme. He is the WBC World Heavyweight Champion. A 7th round stoppage against Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. Utterly dominant 14 months on from their draw. And before that, that was Joe Tessitore, Lennox Lewis and Andre Ward on commentary on Saturday night. In Fury's corner, as I'm sure you know by now, was Andy Lee. We talked to Andy on the show last Monday, and in advance of the fight, he certainly was of the opinion and the conviction that Fury would take the fight to Wilder, that we would see authority in his jabs, and I think it's fair to say that came to pass. Andy was back in OTBAM this morning. Owen Sheehan asked him, what was the difference in Fury's jab at the weekend and previously?
Tyson's jab was a flick of a jab. It was like, it would occupy his opponents. It would never damage them or push them back. It was just like a flick to set up another punch or to occupy his opponent so he could slide off and move around. But now his jab, as I said last week, his jab is a real weapon. And I think that was really telling when Wilder felt that first jab. I actually saw his facial expression change. And, Tyson took 2 good right hands at the start of the fight. And even though that's the fault, it kind of worked in his favour because he just took him and kept walking forward. And I think that in some way demoralised Wilder. But once he got his feet adjusted and found the distance that he could step back quicker than he had been in the first round, he never got hit with the right hand again.
How does a boxing coach take a jab that is there to occupy its opponent to turn it into something that is a weapon of mass destruction?
You just drill it every day and punch correctly. And as I said last week, he's never really been taught the basics of boxing. He's always gotten through, and like his pad work before would be very flashy and it would look fantastic. It would be 7 or 8 combination punches. But you're never going to do that in a fight. Basic boxing wins fights. People who do the simple things correctly win the fights. And that's what it was. So, yeah, and look, it's only been 8 weeks training with me in Sugar Hill. Imagine when he had 6 months or a year. He's going to improve. He's only going to get better and better.
Yeah, which is a frightening thought for everybody in the division. Delighted to say we have with us Declan Taylor, boxing journalist. He was at the MGM Grand on Saturday. And Paulie Malignaggi as well, a 2-weight world champion. Paulie, talk to us about this utterly dominant performance from Tyson Fury.
Yeah, it was, I thought Tyson Fury would win the fight. Going into the fight, I did expect him to do what he was supposed to do to win the fight. I felt he won the first fight, and I thought aside from the knockdowns, he pretty much dominated the first fight. But I think many people got very caught up in what happened with the knockdowns. So I just thought, the adjustments he had to make were minor, and he would win this fight. But really, he made several different adjustments, even that surprised me. I know sometimes guys have some gamesmanship where they say they'll be aggressive and they talk up a big game, but I didn't expect this kind of aggressiveness from Fury. But I'll be honest, when I saw him, the weigh-in, he was very heavy. I thought one of 2 things. I thought either he wasn't trained as properly as he should have, or the opposite, that maybe the weight gain was on purpose so that he could actually enact this bully mentality that was being predicted by John Fury when I met up with John in London at that BC Sport meeting.
Yeah, Fury weighed in at 273 pounds, 19 and a half stone. And it was from the opening bell, Paulie. I mean, he took the middle of the ring and he took the fight to Wilder from the opener.
Yes, he did. I think that was also a mental statement he was trying to make. Not just obviously it's a physical one as well. The fight is physical, but I think mentally he was trying to start getting onto the mentality of breaking Wilder down and just putting him in an uncomfortable position. Well, Wilder, not to say that he doesn't fight, he always fights coming forward, but he has that kind of intimidating power where guys have to respect it and they're not carelessly coming forward. But Tyson has enough athletic ability to not make it careless. He kind of gives you those half step backs, those drop backs, steps that kind of make you take those missteps. And Wilder at times was trying to commit, and Tyson was just taking those quick steps back. And I think even in the corner, Sugar Hill, I noticed one of the instructions Sugar Hill was saying in the corner was quick on the back, quick getting back. Like you could tell that was probably something that the way he was wording it was probably something they had talked about and maybe worked on in the gym. Was you come forward carefully, obviously, but come forward and be aggressive. But when he gets aggressive, leave him hanging. Quick, explosive, quick steps going backwards, and so that Wilder would trip himself up because Wilder's legs aren't as good as Fury's legs. And really, every time Wilder tried to come forward, even when he threw the right hands, and even when he landed a couple of them, they were not flush and they were not and Fury was either rolling with them or was already on the end of them. So nothing landed for Wilder that could really intimidate Fury or get his attention, you know?
Yeah, even that first right that right in the first round, Fury rolled with just enough. And as for what Sugar Hill was saying, freeze him was actually the phrase he used. Freeze him. When you move back, freeze him.
Yes, and exactly, because they knew that if he got back quick enough, it would freeze Wilder's legs. But Wilder's his balance is so bad in every fight that he can only take 1 or 2 steps forward before he's flopping all over the place, you know? So I thought that was really intelligent. And also, yes, exactly, they used the phrase freeze him. So it's something that you can tell they kind of were familiar with because, you know, somebody using a term that's kind of foreign like that means that it's been used in the gym and they're kind of repeating the instructions on fight night. And that's kind of what was... I thought what was going on. I thought it was brilliant as well, you know, that because I think in the first fight, the reason Fury got himself dropped is he tried to go under some of those punches too many times. And not to say that he shouldn't go under some of the punches, but I think he gave up a lot of his advantages by trying to go under too many shots. And I think this time they didn't want Fury to dip under too many times and get in the path of many right hands. So the plan was to, you know, change distance and go backwards a lot when Deontay did try to get aggressive, and then obviously get back on the aggressiveness. And I think it worked brilliantly. I think it worked very perfectly. I think it was a great game plan, and obviously it was executed very well by Fury as well.
Stay with us, Paulie. We also have Declan Taylor with us, a boxing journalist who was at the fight. And when Paulie there talks about freeze him, Declan, that kind of shorthand, as Paulie says, is a sign of real clear thinking in camp, a real plan, and we know exactly what that means, and it's good, concise information. And Fury had that clarity of thought from the opening bell, whereas Wilder, again, as Paulie says, because of his power, because fighters are afraid of him at times, he is not as practiced at fighting on the back foot when somebody is coming onto him. And that was all very evident. This was an uncomfortable night for Wilder from the off.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the training, because that was one of the things I thought that Wilder was going to improve in, because I went to see him in Tuscaloosa before the first fight, and I spoke to the whole team about Fury, and they basically thought he was a clown. They thought he was just an actor, and it was going to be an easy win. Now, obviously, after the first fight, they realised that wasn't the case, and he's a good, you know, he's clearly a brilliant, talented heavyweight. So I thought they were going to adjust to that, and they didn't. You know, they didn't in the rematch, and I think they came unstuck because of it. And it was after, 1 or 2 rounds, you just thought to yourself, wow, he really has never been pushed back like that. We've never seen him have to box on the back foot. We never even have to see him box going backwards. And he didn't know what he was doing with his hands. His chin was in the air. I mean, serious problem. People have spoken about him, this idea of being exposed one day. Yeah, I hate that word, exposed. He hasn't been exposed, but he's been outthought, I think, and in such a short camp for Tyson and the Kronk boys. It was amazing what he pulled off. I'm still kind of in shock about it.
Paulie Malignaggi, that's an interesting point that Declan makes there about the Wilder camp in any way underestimating Tyson Fury.
Yeah, you know, this is a guy that had a win over a prime Vladimir Klitschko even before that fight. So even before that first fight. So I don't understand how you can ever underestimate Fury at that point, even with what he'd been going through, because a prime Vladimir Klitschko, there's no point in Deontay Wilder's career where he beats a prime Vladimir Klitschko. You know, and Fury not only beat him, but he beat him pretty handily. So I thought, you know, I thought that was very a lot of unpreparedness to even have that mentality going into the first fight. But obviously in the second fight, they hadn't made enough adjustments. And going back to the first knockdown, I heard a lot of people trying to say it's a rabbit punch and whatnot, which is totally and utterly ridiculous. The blood on the ear shows that it's not a rabbit punch. He hit him flush on the ear, and then the follow through wound up scraping the back of his head. But the impact of the shot was on the ear. It was not on the back of the head. There was no impact on the back of the head. Whereas the ridiculousness of this whole rabbit punch theory is out the window there. Not to mention, it's pretty much the same shot that dropped, same kind of right hand that dropped, and it landed in pretty much the same place that dropped Fury in the first fight around 8, around 9, whatever that first knockdown was in the first fight.
Declan, that first knockdown, there were 30 seconds left in round 3. That's the first time Wilder's been on the canvas in 10 years, some 30 fights ago. And there was speculation here the eardrum had been ruptured. That was since confirmed not to be the case, that it needed 7 stitches. It was badly cut. We saw the blood coming from the ear, and commentary certainly speculated at the time it was a ruptured eardrum. One of the reasons they did speculate that was also because his balance was so clearly off from that round on, from that punch on.
Yeah, I thought there must have been something wrong. We were going to hear of an injury or something at that point, just because he was so out of character, so out of sorts, particularly from that point. But when you think about it, you've got a 20-stone guy who he expected to box off the back foot, pouring towards you at all times, landing whenever he wanted to head and body. I just wonder whether he was just exhausted earlier than he's ever been, because no one puts it on him like that. And if they do, they usually end up getting knocked out. So he's just in a new sort of world for him, where he's in there absolutely knackered, which is obviously affecting his power. He's not really landing anything. I know Andy mentioned the 2 right hands in the first round. So he's landed flush a couple of times and Fury hasn't budged. Now, after what happened in the first fight, he must be thinking, what do I have to do to this guy to put him away? So mentally already he's thinking about that. And then it just went steadily downhill. And I thought they might have pulled him the round before in the break. Obviously, that wasn't a thought of Jay Diaz at that point, and I'm sure Mark Breland would have been thinking it at that point, because he was getting hit a lot, and obviously we know about the eraser, but it goes the more tired you get. So even when he was throwing that right hand, it didn't seem to have the same pop, obviously, as it usually did. Apparently, it's just a cut in there, and he needed some stitches. It's obviously not ideal, but it was something off with him, and I just wonder what that sort of a beating is going to do for his mentality now going forward.
Yes, Mark Breland ultimately threw in the towel, and Deontay Wilder came over and said, "Why have you done that?" I think it was pretty obvious to everybody. Paulie, could they have ended that fight around sooner?
I thought they were going to end it around sooner. Yeah, I thought he was. I thought he was out of sorts. I give him credit. I mean, I never doubted Deontay Wilder's character, because I thought in the first Lewis Ortiz fight he showed a ton of it. So I knew that if he wound up in a bad situation, he would have to be pulled out of a fight. Because Deontay is the kind of guy, he has no quit. One thing I cannot respect in a fighter is when they have no character and when they're looking to quit when things get bad. Because as a fighter, you have to understand how to not only deal with things when they're going good, but also figure out a way to have the staying power to stay in a fight when things are going bad. So ultimately, guys like that are brave and have character and have to be pulled out of the fight. And I thought that, his job, up to the corner, did a good job. I had no problem with the stoppage. I know Deontay did. He's a competitor. He's going to. But I thought, I think also as a fighter, looking from a fighter perspective, you have to convince the corner, you have to convince the referee that you are capable of staying in there. And his body language was just not convincing to me. Ed piled that on to the blood, the visual of the blood all over him. And it didn't look like a guy that could stay in there any longer, and he wasn't going to quit, But also, I know JD said something about, you never pull out a guy with that kind of power. But to tell you the truth, he was so exhausted. Even if he lands a big shot there, he's so tired that it's not going to have the same kind of steam it usually has. So even his right hand, to me, is a waste of time to keep him in that fight and let him get beat up more, because he's too tired to even put together a big shot like that. Even if his right hand lands at that point, I don't think it's going to do any damage, because he's too tired. It's not going to have the same effect.
Straight away, Paulie, the media have moved on to looking ahead to Fury against Joshua, and it was such a comprehensive victory. I don't really think amongst the general public there is a huge appetite for a rematch. Obviously, both fighters have a rematch clause in their contract. What's your sense of what the Wilder camp are going to do here?
I think Wilder should go out and take a couple of lesser opponents, because he can beat lesser opponents who are still top 10 guys. I really believe that his team stopping that fight prevented him from getting ruined. So I think that he's still good enough to beat most of the top 10 guys in the world, if not the rest of the top 10 guys in the world. I don't know. I know before the fight I was picking these two guys as the top 1 and 2 in the division, and I still want to lean towards that no matter what. I don't know that Deontay took enough of being there where you can say he's ruined. I think his corner stopping it kind of saved him from that. But I think that a rematch is a waste of time. I think if these guys fight 10 times, Tyson beats them all 10 times. Tyson, to me, is the absolute number 1 guy in the weight class right now in the heavyweight division. And I think it's going to be tough to knock him off this perch, But I'd love to see the Joshua fight. I think he's a capable guy, and obviously it's a selling point. But I don't think Wilder should go into the rematch straight away. Maybe look for it later on, even though he's not getting any younger. But you risk ruining yourself if you go into the immediate rematch right away. You risk this fighter getting ruined. Of course, maybe his team doesn't really care for that because they're trying to get the most money they can, where he's a guy who's almost 34 years old. It's possible, and I guess if you're looking at it from a business sense, you look at it that way. But I don't think it's a good idea for Deontay, health-wise, to go into the rematch right away. I know as a competitor he wants to make the wrongs into rights, and he's obviously got a right to think that way. He should think that way. But I think from the outside looking in, I think there's a lot of guys in the top 10 Deontay can still beat, and I think maybe he should go back to that kind of opponent for the time being.
Declan, is there any word from the Wilder camp on what they're going to do?
Well, straight after the fight in the press conference, which actually took place in the ring, Wilder wasn't there. We were told he went to hospital, but actually it turns out he didn't. Anyway, JD's and Shelley Finkel were up there, and Shelley said that he expects to activate the rematch clause. I think they got 30 days in which to do that. Yeah. I think I'm right in saying that it would be a 60-40 split, obviously now in favour of Tyson, so it's good money for Wilder. Like you said, the appetite for it is not going to be anywhere near like it was for the second fight. But when you really assess the landscape, it's still going to make decent money compared to the other names that are in the hat. And if you're Tyson Fury, if you're Sugar Hill Stewart or Andy Lee, you're thinking, yes, please, I'll have that rematch, please, because now it must really look like easy money because of the number they did on him. I'm not sure what Wilder's thinking. It's difficult to tell. Obviously, it was the same thing that happened with Joshua when that happened against Ruiz, and everyone said, is it a good idea to go straight in with the guy who's just bounced you up and down in front of everyone and, mentally scarred you like that? And he went and did a number on him. The thing with Wilder, as we know, is he's got that incredible power. So you'd still have to give him a chance against anyone, including Fury. He'd be a huge outsider now in the third fight. But I've just got a sneaky feeling they might do it because he could go and fight a couple of other guys and make okay money on pay-per-view. But really, he needs to have a belt to really command the massive money that he craves, because no one out there is going to be calling to fight him unless he's got a belt because of that power. And the problem he's got as well is obviously his Fury and Joshua are both British, so he's sort of out of the picture a bit now. It's amazing how it all flips round. So I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule a third fight out. And I think the people around him would fancy it as well.
And Declan, this sport, one of the frustrations people have with it is we don't see the best fighters fight each other when they're at their best. So everybody wants Fury against Joshua. What has to fall into place for that to happen, and how likely is it?
To be honest, I'd be surprised if it happened next, or, Joshua's got to fight Kubrat Pulev in a mandatory for the IBF, but as we know, a unification trumps a mandatory, so in theory you'd think that they'd be able to bin that fight completely. He's also got an issue with the WBO and Alexander Usyk, so again, it would be down to the sanctioning bodies to decide what they're going to do, and would they allow this super fight for all four belts? I would assume they would, but then you've got all the other hurdles like networks, like egos, like just the sides trying to come together and make it happen. The one thing that we should all be thankful for, believe it or not, is that the sort of money that is on offer in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia in particular, is like Deontay Wilder's right hand. It's an eraser. All of those egos, all those hurdles could go out of the way with the sort of money they could just put on the table and say, let's have it here. One of the princes was in attendance at the MGM, sat next to Frank Warren, so they obviously fancy it. They're going to love Fury, he's such a showman. We know they love Joshua. So forget about all the politics, all the arguing. The sort of money that they could put down is, in another stratosphere to what they get, certainly in Britain, definitely in Vegas. So it could happen. I hope so. Obviously, like you say, we've seen so many fights fall by the wayside. I just feel like the sort of money that they could get over in Saudi, it's a shame it would happen there, but at least then we'd get to see it.
Last question to you, Paulie. You've been very good with your time, so it was interesting. Andy Lee said there that we only had 8 weeks in camp with Tyson Fury, and you saw what we did with him. In some respects, he hasn't even been taught the basics of boxing, which is a frightening thought for his next opponent. But regardless, you're of the opinion that Fury against Joshua, Fury is the best fighter in the world in this division.
Yeah, I do think he's the best fighter in the world. I think Joshua's a capable guy, but I think Fury's the best fighter in the division. I've been saying that for a little while now, especially after seeing the first fight with Wilder coming in the way he did. But so I would pick Fury in the rematch. But I think Declan made some good points. I think this fight in the Middle East could be made, and I think the Middle East money is so ridiculous that you could actually prevent Wilder from enacting his rematch clause by paying Wilder. The Middle East money might actually they might say, listen, Deontay, the Middle East, these guys in the Middle East are going to give you this much money to step aside and not enact your rematch clause. So Deontay can come into the free money without having to risk another beating, and maybe take on another respectable top 10 guy that he might beat. Because I think Deontay can still beat some very respectable opponents, and still I think there might be a way to make this thing happen.
Paulie, where is Tyson Fury in the kind of all-time heavyweights conversation? Is he even a part of that in any great way at the moment?
Oh, absolutely, I think he is. I think absolutely he is. I mean, he knocked off... I don't understand how people forget about the Vladimir Klitschko win. That Vladimir Klitschko win was off the hook, like something crazy, and it wasn't a fluke. It was he dismantled Vladimir Klitschko, who hadn't lost in over a decade, and obviously the same Vladimir Klitschko a couple of years later went life and death with Anthony Joshua. So, he beat a more primed up Klitschko and a guy who was still confident of never having been beaten in a long time, He's got to be a bit more consistent, I think, to get everybody's attention. But for me, to see what he's done and what he continues to do, for me, he's in the all-time conversation for sure.
Okay, well, listen, thanks very much. Paulie Malignaggi, a two-weight world champion, and Declan Taylor, boxing journalist as well. Thank you, Declan.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.